The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers, and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities. Some interviews heard on this program may be sponsored by the participants. It's time for Health Futures with Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You, and I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park Studios. It is July 23rd, and it is, if you live here in Arizona, especially here in the Scottsdale vicinity, it is raining literally cats and dogs. We are getting a monsoon, and I got to tell you, I mean, my pool literally is overflowing. It's nice. We need this water. We need this rain. Keep it coming. So if this is the first time you have tuned into our show is about how our older adult population can live a healthier, happier life. How do we do this? We do this by bringing extraordinary guests to the show. And today we have an extraordinary guest. And she's making a fourth time appearance. She was last here September 11th, 2020, and we were in the throes of this pandemic, and she was talking about some of the stuff that she was doing with Possibilities Cafe and being the shadow healer and business builder. And she also is the CEO and founder of the Arizona Assisted Living Federation, ALPHA. And if you haven't figured out who this person is, it is Karen Barno. So Karen, welcome to the studio.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I always look forward to this. It's like chatting with friends.
Well, we are friends, and maybe you can share with our listeners your trip from Tempe back up to here. You probably felt like you needed a speedboat.
Oh, Lord. I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'm used to this weather. This weather should not scare me. I had to pull off the interstate. It was so bad you couldn't see in front of you. The 101, it's flooding, so I had to pull off and let the rain settle down for about 15 minutes. I even had to call and tell you that. I didn't know if I could make it.
I know.
I'm a no-quit person, so I was like, I got to get there.
You had to get here because I could never carry the show by myself.
Oh, I think you could.
Well, it's great to have you in the show, and certainly there's so much happening, and especially in the healthcare vertical, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, whether it be the workforce issues, whether it be the affordability challenges, whether it be this pandemic. I mean, it feels like, the plagues from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
We got the flooding, we've got the pandemic. Things are very challenging.
I think everybody needs to get right so we can straighten up all this stuff.
Right.
When you said post-pandemic, it's like, are we post-pandemic?
Well, we're actually, I think, getting ready to start maybe another one. They keep talking about these variants, and you and I were talking prior to the show. I think that COVID's going to be around for a long time, and this should be actually COVID-21, and that's what we're dealing with. This virus right now is highly transmissible. It's 1,000 times more transmissible than it was before, and I'm here to share with our listeners my father. A.K.A. Noodles, who's been here on the studio a number of times with me. He is in the hospital right now, and he has COVID. And he's one of those breakthroughs who has had the vaccination and still got COVID. And I think we're seeing more and more of that.
But it's fascinating how he got it. So, I mean, when you say breakthrough, it is a breakthrough, but there's a reason behind it.
Well, there is a story, and you know what? I'd like to share that with our listeners. And it's a role reversal. Karen, you're interviewing me, so that's okay. I'm very happy to share this with the listeners. So listeners, please listen up. My father, 85 years old, has a lot of comorbidities, and one of them is psoriatic arthritis, and he was having an issue with his hand, and unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, he reached out to his rheumatologist, and his rheumatologist didn't see him, but he had an issue many years earlier that was very similar, and he prescribed him steroids to treat it. And he taken a picture and sent it over to him, and his rheumatologist prescribed steroids. And he went through one round of treatment and didn't get any relief. And then he went through a second round of treatment, almost 3.5 weeks that he was on steroids. And it still didn't help. And then when he went in to go see his physician took a look at his hand and said, oh, that's not arthritis, that's edema. So he went through 3.5 weeks of being on steroids. The challenge is that the steroids end up taking back the antibodies, the vaccine, and what it's supposed to do. It affects the integrity of the vaccine. And little did he know, and he was not advised by his physician to mask up and stay at home and not do what he has been doing, and he got the virus. And what he found out was when he got into the hospital, he had no antibodies from the vaccine. So the steroids had a direct effect on that. And I'm here to tell our listeners, if you are on any type of immune therapy and any therapy drugs that are immune compromising, like steroids, you need to really be cautious. You should be staying home. And if you need to go out, you should be masking up.
Yeah. Well, I agree. But I think right now is the time that everybody needs to start putting their mask back on. And starting to get overly cautious again.
I think so too.
You know, and it's so confusing, because when you walk into places, it's like, should I have a mask? Should I not have a mask? Where I think we just need to mask up and just get through this.
I'm looking at the numbers, and I think everyone is, and this is the big talk right now, and the biggest challenge that we have right now, the people that are showing up in the hospital with COVID are unvaccinated, and our CDC director made it very clear we have a pandemic going on of the unvaccinated.
98%.
Yeah,
of the people getting it.
98% and 99.7% of the deaths that are happening are unvaccinated. And what's happening with the ones that are vaccinated, and unlike my father who didn't have any antibodies, a lot of them are getting just mild situations. They're getting colds, runny noses, maybe a little bit of fever, but nothing that can really hospitalize them. They just need to get through that. So what do you think that's going to do for our business? And I'm talking about the long-term care space. I mean, we need to probably hit the reset button and, start, masking up and doing some of the things that we were doing prior in the last phase of this pandemic, right?
Yeah, I agree. Most of assisted living, all of assisted living is masking up, and PPEs coming back out because we want to be overly cautious. So you're seeing more and more of that. I mean, we're still allowing families to come in and visit. I think that was the hardest part of the last go-around, is families not being allowed to get in. So I'm optimistic that will continue. Just families are going to have to be patient. They're going to have to understand signing in, signing out, going through the protocol, masking up, and maybe taking a direct path to their family member's room and staying there instead of possibly being able to walk around. Unvaccinated family members, I don't know how we're going to handle that, because as you know, in healthcare, we're the one industry that is allowed to ask vaccination status.
Right.
Most schools, colleges cannot. We're allowed to, and what I'm suggesting to my members that they start asking families to prove their status.
And it's so confusing. I mean, it really is. I mean, first of all, there's really no record keeping on, a universal central location where all the records are being kept that people are vaccinated or unvaccinated. So you're taking people on blind faith that they say that they were vaccinated. They can produce a card, but then again, I've heard people can get stuff off of the internet that looks like those cards, and they say that they were vaccinated. So, it is the honor system, and we hope that they are being truthful and honest. But we have to figure out a way to protect, especially the older adults that we care for.
We truly do. And, we're just going to have to trust the families. And I think at the end of the day, people are going to be honest about their vaccination status.
I would hope so.
And when it comes to that. And all we'd probably ask if they're not vaccinated is just to really mask up, put PPE on, glove up, go through the whole gown, everything to still get in to see your loved ones.
I think the masking up is probably the way to go, especially when you're in public places. I mean, you definitely need to do that because you just don't know if that virus is present. And the fact that it is 1,000 times more transmissible, which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. It's frightening.
Well, you know what? I want to talk about some better things after this. So, that was a little dose of reality. Please to our listeners, put out your prayers for Noodles. He's making some progress, but he's got a little ways to go. Papa Bear, if you're listening, you're up for the fight. And I think you always said the only way to kill Roth is with a gun. So, come on, you can do it. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Karen Barno here in the studio, good friend here, originally from Pittsburgh. We might have to talk about Pittsburgh and their sports teams. You never know.
They're winners.
They're winners. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. We're in our second segment. If you're just tuning in, I've got Karen Barno here in the studio, and Karen comes to us with a lot of experience, and her expertise is obviously the founder and CEO of the Arizona Assisted Living Federation of Arizona, and she's also the host of the Possibilities Cafe podcast, Shadow Healer, and Business Builder. And that's kind of your new venture, and I got to tell you, I think you're so great at that.
Thank you.
You have this really calm voice, and you really talk about some of the challenges that women go through, and more of it's confidence. And I feel like you really address that, and you address some of those, how should I put it, those insecurities maybe some women have. You have a following. You've been doing this for how long now?
Probably about 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So tell me what's new in that venture that you're working on.
Well, I changed my podcast name to Blue Rose Cafe.
Okay.
The Blue Rose podcast, because those of you that know me know that it's all about finding your blue rose. And the blue rose, you cannot create blue rose naturally. Little mind boggler there. They've been trying to in China for the past 5 years to create a blue rose, and it's just genetically impossible.
That's crazy.
I know. So
they got all these different colors. They can't do blue.
So when you get it, it's a dyed flower.
Right.
So it has taken on the meaning of enchantments and new beginnings. And for you women listening, we all have our challenges growing up and, kind of being left in our place, or maybe not as encouraged to blossom. And we just grow these shadows, and I help women find their path. My goal is to help 1 million make 1 million.
Wow, I love that. I love that. Is there like a sweet spot in terms of the demographic, and I'm talking about age, that you're working with? Do you find that the younger generation has the gumption, if you would, to be out there and succeeding, and maybe not as reserved? Or what are you seeing out there?
The women I typically work with are 55 and older. But I am finding 35 to 40 are really starting to reach out as well. I think we just can't help it. I don't want to get into the political, women versus men and, race different and all that kind of stuff. But I think as we get older, and I think men are the same way, we aren't necessarily encouraged to follow our path. We're encouraged to follow the familiar path or the path that's going to make us the most money, especially women. We come out of college, we have children, we've got to get jobs. We start taking jobs that fit our child care needs.
Right.
Or fit our marriage needs or whatever. And, we hit 45, 50, and we look around and say, is this it? What do I really want to do? And some women have never asked themselves that question.
Well, it's interesting. How much do you think has changed now since the pandemic, especially when you talk about child care? I mean, the fact is a lot of people did work around that, and because they went into offices, and now we're finding, a lot of good has come from the pandemic. We've learned that we can visit doctors and we don't have to physically go. We can use telemedicine. We're finding a lot of people are doing remote work. I imagine a lot of women are able to have their children and be able to be at home and work at the same time. Are you seeing some of that?
We're seeing some of that, but women were also the most affected by the pandemic. They were laid off the most. They lost their jobs the most.
Yes.
So financially, they have been impacted more. So doing child care at home sometimes isn't necessarily a blessing if you're on Zoom calls all day and you're trying to manage your children. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think the positive is we all realize that we do not need to have 20 meetings all over the state of Arizona, that we can do it on Zoom.
Right, no doubt. And it's really interesting. I mean, for me, I think the thing that I am most impressed about is women are so able to multitask. I mean, I don't have that skill set, and I find most women are able to do multiple things at the same time. And as you know, our healthcare vertical that we're in, and especially in home care, mostly women, and we're able to do so much because they can do so much.
Yeah, but not all women at the top. Mostly women in the lower positions, some middle, but at the top it's still not as many women as I would like to see. But I think men and women, when they work together, they complement each other, because men, in my opinion, are more team oriented, meaning when you have 5 guys together, they instantly figure out who's the quarterback, who's the lead dog, and then they follow them. Women were more relational, who's the best at this, and would you like to do this? And I think if it's done right, they complement one another.
Nice. I would imagine through this process, not only have you helped a lot of people, you've learned a lot.
A lot. I've learned a lot about myself.
Wow.
When you do shadow healing, in fact, I was one of the girls in my office, Mariah's in town, and I just went to the restroom to wash my hands. I came back and I said I healed a shadow, and she's so used to me. She's like, oh.
So explain to our listeners, what does it mean to shadow heal?
A shadow is the repressed part of you that was unacceptable to somebody. And I'll use a real quick example. My Nana was the best Nana in the world. She was about 4'8", 5 feet, and she probably weighed 300 pounds. When you hugged her, it was a hug of love.
Oh, yeah.
I loved my Nana. My mother was brittle diabetic, so she was very thin, and she did not like heavy people. My sister was thin. My brother was thin. I was not. So my mom told me I had the fat
now.
gene. Well, still working on it. But my mom told me I had the fat gene.
Nice.
So I believed it. So my whole life I've been heavy until I did some shadow work on myself and thought, is there really such a thing as a fat gene? But I realized because she had such issues with being heavy that it was my way of controlling my life as a child that I carried the whole way through me. And that's why now I'm able to lose weight, because it's like, okay, I get it. I don't need weight to control myself. And for women, weight is typically protection. Mm-hmm. If you're carrying extra weight as a woman, you feel you need protection from something. So there's a shadow.
Interesting. But, I'd love to hear what it has done for you. I mean, obviously you're helping so many women. I mean, you have to be, getting a lot of healing. You must be getting a lot of just satisfaction in helping people through these journeys and coaching them through really challenging times.
I love watching a light bulb go off. I love talking to women and just watching them go, oh. Because it could just be a comment somebody made.
Right.
I graduated, believe it or not, in the bottom 5% of my high school class. When I walked across the dais, I had to look to see if it was signed, because even my parents didn't know. And my parents knew everybody in town. Even they didn't know if I made it. I ended up graduating. I have a college degree. I'm CEO of a company. But I was taught as a young child, because I had a speech impediment, I can't say my R's or my S's, that I was mentally slow. And
you were fat.
And I was fat.
Wow.
So you carry that stuff with you, and it's just a little comment of...
You had the fat gene, I mean.
Yeah. Well, and, my mom or my dad, because my dad was very smart, well, you're not as smart as your brother or sister. But you'll be able to, get a job, don't worry. Well, it was just that little comment, and that's how shadows work. It's just a little comment that they meant nothing, but you internalized it.
Right.
And you made it into something else.
Right. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, women are more vulnerable to that, where men just sometimes let that bounce right off.
No, I'm going to have to disagree.
Okay.
I think men are equally. Men just are not, I don't want to say they're not as self-reflective. Men are more like, I'm going to work my way through it, whereas women are like, I need help. I need somebody to explain this to me.
Interesting.
Men will kind of see a block, and my gift, and that's probably why I started doing shadow healing. If I talk to somebody, I can tell them their block within about 10 minutes, because people will always reveal it.
Right.
So, men have revealed it as well.
And is that a trait that you have? I mean, would I be able to tell that, or you've just been doing this enough that you're able to see that within 10 minutes?
It's just a gift.
Wow.
We all have gifts.
Right.
And a lot of times our shadows keep our gifts buried, because as children, I was a loud, outgoing child. I could sell anything as a child, and it drove my mother crazy, so I learned not to like sales. So, and I learned how to hide and not be as outgoing. And it's taken me years to realize that it's okay to be just a little over the top.
And I know you as being a little over the top.
There you go.
So you've gotten out of that. Fantastic.
I don't hide as much, and I think everybody's guilty of hiding.
Right, right. And as we close this first half, how do you think this has helped you in the professional world?
I'm much more confident. And I think at the end of the day, women, if they can be confident, they can own the world. If they can have unstoppable confidence. So people have always said I was confident. I wasn't as confident as I am now, and I don't hide. In the past, I would look around and see if anybody was going to raise their hand. Even at, regulatory meetings that you and I have attended together, I've looked around, and now I don't care.
Right. No, that's really interesting, and how you've applied that in your own professional life. Wow, we're down one half here. Just as we get ready to close, I want our listeners to know how they can maybe listen to your Blue Rose podcast.
I'm on iTunes and Spotify, and you just type in Blue Rose Podcast, and just for the record, I am number 8 rating in Norway.
Number 8 rating in Norway?
In Norway.
Have you ever been to Norway?
Absolutely not.
Well, you need to go.
But I'm number 8.
I know you're number 8. I think you should have like a live show.
I know.
Announce that you're going.
I know. I should go to Norway. I just, of all places, Norway. So thank you, Norwegians.
And rating here? It's listeners, we want you to plug into Spotify or iTunes. Look for Blue Rose. It's Blue Rose.
Blue Rose podcast, or like my YouTube channel.
Or like your YouTube channel.
Which is Karen Barno.
Very good. Well, we got a little Grateful Dead taking us out in the first half. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I've got Karen Barno here in the studio. One half down, one to go. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You, and if you're just tuning in, we're in our second half here. I've got Karen Barno. She's the CEO and founder of Arizona Assisted Living Federation of Arizona, otherwise known as ALFA. She's also the host of Blue Rose podcast, and she's a shadow healer and business builder. And if you missed our first half, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. Third button down is radio show. You'll catch this show and about 400 others, and the 3 others that you did with me as well. So we got a chance to talk about COVID at the very beginning. We talked about this variant that's out there, the Delta variant. We shared with our listeners about my dad fighting the fight against COVID right now, who had the vaccination, who is, technically he's a breakthrough, and there are very few of those that are vaccinated and they are hospitalized. I did share with everyone about his journey, the fact that he did take steroids and they were prescribed to him by his rheumatologist, and that really was the gateway to allow this variant in. And I want our listeners to be very cautious on the medications that they do take. Talk to your healthcare practitioner, and if it does, compromise the benefit of something like a vaccination, you should be thinking about either staying at home or making sure that you are masked up. And Karen, you said it, right now, because it is a hotbed out there, we should be masking up in public.
We should. And please get vaccinated. Just please.
Yeah, please do. Definitely do that. So along the lines of vaccinations, this week was announced that Banner Health, starting, I think it's August 1st, 100% are requiring their employees to be vaccinated. That's a bold move by the largest employer in our state. It's really interesting to see that they're doing that. And I always thought that I didn't think they would jump on it just because they need so many employees. And, they employ about 57,000 people. And if all of a sudden they, have 10% to say, you know what, I'm not going to get vaccinated, all of a sudden they have a void in employees. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them.
I think it's leading by example.
Oh, I do too. But I think it's a risk that they're taking.
I think it's a risk, but there's some senior housing communities that have done the same, senior housing companies that have done the same. Because if your charge is to protect your resident or protect your patient, then you've got to walk the walk and say, okay, we're going to figure this out. Now, we both know the workforce shortage is real.
It's real.
COVID made it realer, more real. So there's a risk, but if everybody follows that philosophy, then, the resident and the patient wins in the end.
I think in theory it makes a lot of sense, but we still can't get people to get vaccinated. I mean, we're in this state right now. Maricopa County's at 70%, but the state's still below 50%.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get more people vaccinated? And, maybe it'll take bold moves by employers like Banner and others to require that.
Yeah, I don't know if I could answer that question.
I know.
I don't. I guess I could say sometimes I understand the hesitancy. It does, to a lot of people, seem like it was rushed to the marketplace, but it really wasn't. They've been working on a vaccination since SARS.
Yep.
So they've been working on this vaccination for 10 years, 10, 15 years. They were just able to now target it to heal something. So it wasn't just cooked up overnight.
And you know what? You're so right. That mRNA vaccine was literally sitting on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got the code, when China put that up and the World Health Organization verified it, all the scientists started working on it. And essentially many of these pharmaceutical companies that had the vaccine, they needed to go ahead and test it. So that's the reason why we didn't start vaccinating people right away. They needed to get some of the data first before they pushed that out. So, I mean, theoretically, they could have started pushing that out in January or February.
Exactly. And I mean, this is America. Would you expect less than us to be able to do that much that fast?
Right.
I mean, we have access. It's a world marketplace now. It's not just, it's a global industry. So you get all the best scientists in one room and say, okay, nobody's leaving until we figure this out. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, everybody light up your cigar and figure this out.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting that, a lot of the public service announcements now are centered around people that were not vaccinated, and they're getting testimonials from them from the hospitals saying, I should have gotten vaccinated. And unfortunately, they're family members of loved ones that have been lost as a result of that, and they were unvaccinated. And I think that type of public service announcement is going to definitely help.
I think so. It's a personal decision, and I have friends that haven't been vaccinated. I have loved ones that haven't been vaccinated. It's a personal decision. The problem is sometimes your personal decision affects other people. So, but if you don't get vaccinated, you can live in a bubble and stay home all day long. Perfect.
It's about public health.
Yeah.
And public safety.
And it's joining together. I mean, it's what we do. We join together. We all get healthy. Hopefully a year from now, the pandemic is completely gone and we can recover and
Amen.
Look back and, think about when we look back now at the Depression and we see people standing in food lines and we think, did that really happen? I actually look forward to the day that we look at pictures with our grandkids and they say, did that really happen?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's hard to believe that this did happen. I mean, if you go back a couple years and say, we were going to be in a world that was going to be masked up in the middle of the pandemic, that people were going to be staying at home and work was going to come to a screeching halt, people would have never believed you.
Yeah, never.
Never, ever believed you. Real quickly, as we get ready to wind down our third segment, workforce. It's the biggest challenge that not only the healthcare vertical is experiencing, anybody that is employing somebody that is making a livable wage is really challenged right now. And the question is are people going to be coming back to work? We know our governor, he eliminated the federal subsidy back, I think it was July 10th. In my space, we have a lot of caregivers that, and I hate to say it because I don't want to indict any individual, but a lot of them were collecting unemployment and a lot of them were continuing to work and they were working underground. And, you and I and the senior care community need to protect one of the most vulnerable populations out there. And we need to bring a lot of those people from the underground back up and need to get them to be employed and protected and trained and having all those necessary things to do their job and do it right.
Yeah, I think the one thing we've seen come out of COVID is, back when it first started, they were talking about how caregivers work 3 or 4 different communities at a time. We're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing caregivers go to one community, get a good salary and stay. We're not seeing that working 3 or 4 places because the salaries are also rising.
Well, the salaries are also rising, but also I think a lot of the caregivers, they themselves are a little worried by going to multiple places and maybe risking themselves for exposure.
Well, and they got beat up. Caregivers are loving, compassionate people. And they opened up the paper and talked about how these caregivers went, 3-4 places working, and it hurt their hearts.
We talk about workforce, and this was one of the headlines I read this morning off of Yahoo, and that was more than a third of workers, 37%, are thinking of leaving their current jobs or are already preparing to make the move, according to Yahoo Finance survey that was done at the end of June. 4 in 5 of the potential quitters, 83%, want to make the move in the next 6 months, while the same percentage said they're considering the move over the next year.
It's an employee marketplace right now. More than ever, it is an employee marketplace.
Well, I mean, you think about it, all right? So if you worked in the hospitality business and a restaurant business, and even as a caregiver, you're working weekends, you're working holidays, and really literally over the last 16, 17 months, if you were not working, you had your weekends and you had your holidays and you had, all this time to be with your family, and you're like, crap, I gave all this up. This isn't bad. I need to find a job that I can work so I can have all of that. So it gave people a lens into that world. So I think it's going to take some time to bring a lot of people back into these various verticals in workforce.
Well, an employer is going to have to be more flexible. Flexible scheduling. It's not going to be you're going to work night shift. It's going to be, will you work night shift this day, and we'll plug everything in. I just think there's going to be give and take on both sides, which is a good thing.
And you know what? We didn't need a law to get to $15 minimum wage.
No.
We're there already.
Yeah, exactly.
We are, and I can tell you home care workers are making well over $15 an hour. And I think I saw a Taco Bell sign $17 an hour.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A is at $18 right now.
$18 an hour. So I mean,
where was that when we were kids?
Exactly.
I mean, what were we making? Like $3?
$4.25. That's what I was making. $4.25. I remember that. Well, times have definitely changed, and we need to figure out how to get more workers back in the workforce. And I think it's more than just money. It's appreciation, it's benefits, it's making them feel like they are part of something more than just a job. Because people just don't want to work a job. They want to be part of something that's much bigger than that.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to be part of a team.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to be included and filled. Everybody wants love.
Well, exactly. And being a part of a team is really important. It's like a wolf pack, right? You can't have a wolf pack of one. At least that's what Zach Galifianakis said in the movie Hangover. You got to have a pack. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I got Karen Barno in the studio. Stick around. We got one more segment. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. A little Steely Dan to take us into our fourth segment. Thank you, James, on a rainy day here in Scottsdale. Yeah, definitely a classic. Just like me, right?
Absolutely.
Got Karen Barno here in the studio, and Karen and I have talked about a whole list of things. I urge you to go out to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, third button down is radio show. You'll catch this show and many others. So, Karen, we've talked about a lot of things here, and this is our last segment. What do you want to talk about?
We could talk about your daughter, Samantha.
Samantha Joe
is the best follow on Twitter.
Oh, thank you.
If you're not following her on Twitter, you guys are missing something. She's a good follow.
No, thank you. I don't know if you saw the manatee piece that she put together, saving the manatees. I just can't believe how many manatees are dying right now. And a lot of it is from the red tide. And I'm sure our listeners may have heard about the red tide, but the red tide in Florida brings in a lot of algae that kills a lot of fish and certainly has affected the manatees.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, it is. And she also, just recently did a whole thing on healthcare and home care. So I really appreciate it.
Wonder why she did home care. So what are you seeing in home care? I mean, I know we're seeing in assisted living, the challenges, but you guys go home to home.
Right.
Hence home care. What challenges are you guys seeing?
Well, for workforce is number one. I mean, certainly finding the workers to do the job. That is an imperative, and we need to get more people back into the workforce. And you and I could sit here and talk the entire show about how we need to make this more of a career. It's an entry level career position. Make it a career lattice where you go from being a caregiver to maybe a CNA or an RN or even on to an occupational therapist, physical therapist, or even a doctor or an administrator in healthcare. It's a great starting ground.
I agree, but I hesitate with that, and I've sat in many discussions about that because sometimes I feel like when we say, okay, you can start as a CNA and then a caregiver, because caregivers pass meds, and an RN, we're almost saying if you're a CNA and caregiver, don't you want more? When being a CNA and caregiver is amazing, and they're fulfilled. So
Well, I can tell you just from firsthand experience from some of my caregivers that started, and the in-home caregivers are not allowed to pass meds versus in a
Correct.
facility where they are.
Thank you for that correction.
No, that's
Yeah.
okay. So, I mean, this gives, it's a great ground for people that want to go on to doing more in healthcare. I've had caregivers go on to be nurses or physical therapists and occupational therapists, and they've come back and talked to me and said the experience that they had working one-on-one with somebody in a home was so invaluable versus the training that they did when there was 1-on-8 or 1-on-15. The connections that they made, they cherish because they were able to sit down and have conversations with the person that they're caring for and really understanding what their needs are. And that helped them propel their career into doing other things, into caring. So I think it's a great starting ground. I think, personally, I think that, when you and I were in school, we had home economics, we had wood shop. I think that every single school should be teaching caregiving, maybe even becoming a CNA.
Absolutely.
Because even if you don't use that professionally, we have so many family caregivers, over 50 million of them right now that are caring for loved ones. So you'll always have those skill sets, and those skill sets will be innate, and you'll be able to use those to help your loved ones. And I think that's really, really important.
And it never goes away. I was a medic in the military. So when I got out of the military, I knew how to be a CNA and caregiver. So when I was in college, although I worked at the newspaper, when I needed more money, the little extra money, I went and did home care.
Beautiful.
You never lose that skill set, and you get to sit. You don't just sit and talk, but the relationships you build with these families are just marvelous.
You become part of their family.
Yeah, you do.
You really do. But to answer your question, I think, workforce is one of them, but innovation in tech is another part. And I think there's so much going on right now with innovation and technology. And I'm not just talking remote patient monitoring, and I'm not just talking about getting clinical data, and I'm talking about blood pressure, pulse ox, or your blood sugar. I'm talking about more behavioral. I'm talking about understanding movement and utilizing artificial intelligence to be able to decipher when there's a break in the pattern. There's radar technology that can actually be able to detect when someone's gait changes, so that you might be able to predict a fall before the fall happens. Those are really important things. I think being able to keep people at home and keeping them out of an acute or post-acute setting, which costs health plans, costs the federal government and state a lot of money, is going to be invaluable. So I think bolting on some of those innovations in tech are going to really be able to make home a safe place for people to age and be able to live out their lives.
And I agree, but the tech I'm probably most excited about right now is the Alexa. Of how so many people out there, because families couldn't come into assisted living in nursing homes and hospitals. So it's trying to keep the lines open, and how these places are developing this app. So Alexa can talk to the resident, or, the TVs where they're going to be able to talk back and forth. So families won't feel disconnected, because that was the hardest thing. It was the families not being able to lay eyes on mom and dad.
Well, I'll tell you what, you were on a show with me back in 2014 with John Scott. And
he's a tech whiz. John Scott, if he's listening, he's laughing, because that man is a tech guy.
And Cole Marvin, and I got to tell you, he's using it. And I got to tell you, it talked about my dad at the top of the show. And, what really led to his hospitalization is he had a fall. Now, Constant Companion has a Alexa series, if you would. They use the Alexa technology, so I have it set up through his house. So a big props to Constant Companion for really pulling that together. And Mark Ugoda really helped me out in getting my dad set up. And my dad lost his wife about 4 months ago, and we moved him to an apartment. So I have these in every room. When he fell, He was nowhere near his phone, and we had pre-programmed that constant companion for him to just say, call Bobby. And he called me and he told me he had fallen, and I would have known, and I might have not found him until the next day.
Yeah.
So
that's what I'm most excited about, as well as the tech that, disinfects the apartments quickly, because that's the big thing. I mean, as you know, what families looked at before when they came into assisted living, what they look at now are two different things.
very different.
So it's the
thing.
disinfectant tech we're seeing. It's amazing how in 2 years so many great things have been brought to the marketplace.
As bad as things have been, we have had some really good things happen, and there are future things that are becoming. We got about 30 seconds. I'm going to give it to you to say, is there a question I haven't asked? Is there a leaving thought you want to leave our listeners? Beside the Steelers, obviously. But
besides the Steelers,
Stillers.
Well, it is the Steelers. It's not the Steelers like everybody thinks. For everybody to mask up, for everybody to, wash their hands, be safe, be kind to one another.
So true.
Be loving. Everybody's trying right now. Everybody's going through a lot. Just let's be cool. Let's be
cool.
Let's be love.
And a big shout out to your podcast. How do we find that?
Blue Rose Podcasts on iTunes and Spotify. And if you want Arizona Assisted Living Federation of America, our website's azalfa.org.
Karen Barno, thank you so much for being on the show. Make sure you dodge those raindrops. You don't get caught in any floods. We have much needed rain, and hopefully we'll get even more. It's hard to believe we didn't even have any rain during last monsoon season.
It is, and in my backyard, I took a picture and posted it to Facebook. It is so green, it looks like a yard back east. In July.
And my pool is nearly overflowing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And then you look at all, the wildfires where we thought the state.
You've been listening to Health Futures. Make it a great day. We'll be back next Friday. Thank you, Karen Barno.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress Home Care Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.